Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is the third WWO webinar entitled Trauma and Its Effects on Early Learning. Thank you for joining us. Today we have two esteemed experts with us, Lois Cam Heyman, who is a speech and language pathologist. She has 40 years of experience, and she has worked with children in listening, language, and learning challenges, and she has worked with their families as well. Lois's book, The Sound of Hope, is used as a guide for parents as they work towards understanding the importance of listening on their children's educational development. Thank you, Lois, for joining us. Lois has been our program creator for much of our WWO Element of Play program, and she has worked with us as a trainer on our teams in Haiti, Bulgaria, Ethiopia, Vietnam, and in the US. Her value and her contribution to this organization, we could never value it properly because it is so incredible. Thank you, Lois. Thank you for all of your years of work for us and your contribution to our programs. Thank you for joining us today. We also have the pleasure of bringing Naama Yehuda, who is a colleague and friend of Lois's. Naama is a speech and language pathologist as well. She has 30 years of experience. She has worked with families working with traumatized children. She has a book that is fantastic, award-winning book called Communicating Trauma. It is used around the world as a guide for caregivers, educators, and clinicians. Thank you so much for joining us, Naama. It is a privilege to have you with us today. Today, the title of our webinar is extremely heavy and weighty, talking about trauma. I think it would be wonderful to start this discussion with kind of a broad definition, or maybe the definition that we will be using as we talk about trauma in today's discussion. Naama, could you take that on, just giving us the definition that we'll be using for this webinar today?
Yeah, gladly. I think that trauma can have different meanings for different people, and there's the sort of the psychological, the DSM definition. But for the sake of my work and my clinical experiences with children, I look at trauma as not necessarily what people often think, which is the result of somebody deliberately doing something to traumatize a child, as in an active abuse or maltreatment, but that it is the situations where children are exposed to circumstances or experiences that exceed their ability to cope. When something is too much for a child to cope with, and they don't have a way to help regulate it and a help to understand it, or somebody to help them process it and calm from it, then it can have a lasting impact on their ability to regulate later on, especially when this is something that is ongoing or combined with other aspects of adversity that maybe make caregivers less able to note that the child is overwhelmed, or the caregivers themselves are overwhelmed. So you have this situation that is ongoing that creates circumstances that exceed the child's ability to cope. And that's what we would say, that those circumstances are potentially traumatizing the child.
And when you mention the parent feeling overwhelmed, I think we can immediately, anyone who is a parent can immediately identify with that part of the definition, the concept of feeling overwhelmed and dealing with children that are overwhelmed. So you have the double whammy of an overwhelmed parent and an overwhelmed pair or more children that are all in the home together. So thank you. I think that the children, and I mentioned that Lois has worked with us for over 10 years and has contributed endlessly. She's also worked in all of the countries that we are currently in. Lois, I'd love for you to perhaps reach back in your a story or experience that really kind of highlighted this level of overwhelm. And in your 10 years with us or more, I'm sure you have tons of stories. But if you could just maybe pick one that would kind of illustrate this feeling of this parent is overwhelmed.
Yeah. Sure. So I guess I'll go back to my first trip with WWO, which was actually to Haiti. And going into Haiti, of course, was a culture shock in a way for me. And going there, one of the first things that I saw when the parents and the children, because we have a program there where the parents bring their children to the what's now called the EOP learning space, and the children and the parents were both sitting there, and the toys were there, but and people were playing, but nobody was talking. And it was shocking to me that there was no input, verbal input, coming from the adults in the room, and there were many of them, and the children were sort of just banging on the toys or playing with their toys in a very passive way. And what was interesting about it for me, especially, and you could see the overwhelm. This is, a land of great poverty. These children and parents are both traumatized by the situations, of course, in Haiti. And here we had this beautiful space and we had these beautiful toys. And so the training really took place with the facilitators in Haiti, is really in input, that we have to model for the children and for the adults especially, that the more we talk and interact and engage with the child, the more they're going to take the information in and then be able to play and learn and flourish in a way that doesn't take away the trauma, but actually helps them fill in the developmental milestones they need and supplies resiliency, both for the adult and for the child, to be able to handle these difficult situations even better. And I see this repeated time and time again, whether I'm in Bulgaria working with the children, the Roma children, that's a very large population there, or whether we're going into Addis Ababa, where we have a great deal of children that were in orphanages. All of these situations bring about a trauma that is a different type of trauma, but most of it can be created by the input and the joyful input with play and language and song. And that's what we have found over and over again.
Thank you. And that's a kind of a perfect segue, because both you and Nam have done extensive amount of work with children in the United States as well. So we tend to focus mostly on our international programs, but when we look at the universality of what's happening and how children and parents react to this situation, I'd love to get a little bit of feedback on what you have found with your parents and with the children that you work with in the States recently. Who would like to take that on, since you both have extensive, experience in the States as well as internationally?
Nama?
Would you like to?
Sure. Well, I think that what Lois was describing also was super interesting to me, because I see children who sometimes came out of situations of great adversity, whether they were adopted from orphanages or from foster homes or from group homes and things like that. And I think the running thread that we see in populations that I work with here, some of them are children who used to be in high stress situations and are now in better situations, but they bring what they've learned with them, and the caregivers need to learn to adapt to how to communicate with a child who has learned different ways of being. And then you have the families that I've worked with in the inner city, in Harlem, in the Bronx, in schools that were very hard to staff because of the high incidence of special education, IEP, children with difficulties and adversities. And you indeed see that sort of parallel cohabitation of a space. So you have the caregivers and you have the children in the same space, but there's not a whole lot of communication going on that is not directive. So you see, sit down, cut it out, enough, come here, but not the, so what are we going to do? Oh, this is so much fun. Let's build together. So there's not a whole lot of interaction. And I think that when we look at this through the lens of what happens under stress, is that stress shuts down language centers in the brain. So when we are in a situation of stress, our language centers are not in their prime. And when you have somebody who's chronically stressed, it sort of becomes their default is that their interactive language relating, narrating, communicating verbally with somebody else and understanding what other person is communicating verbally or otherwise is not operating to the optimum. And this is where programs like you have developed and programs and training and sort of consulting and showing and modeling to parents how you can create those situations and be more mindful of them and how to take care of your own stress levels and recognize when you're in that place where you're not really engaging, that can really make a huge difference in the way that those interactions continue and in the language that the children are exposed to, because quantity and quality matters.
Right. And when you bring this story brings up the power of really working with the parents and with the children. And I know both you and Lois very much believe in that and work with both the parents and the children as part of your practices. So thank you for bringing that up, because that is very much how WWO approaches working with children to help them reach their developmental milestones, but also to strengthen the family around learning being part of what you do at school and what you do at home, and the incredible power that the parents have to turn things around and make the help the child overcome any of the challenges that they may have experienced from their earlier years. Lois, if you could give us a little bit of experience that you've had with parents in the States and children in the States, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Well, my private practice, my work as a speech language pathologist always involves the parent with young children. So the parent is always in the room as a learner and as a facilitator. So that's I believe in the power of parents, and that parents are our children's first teachers. And if they need help in knowing how to play with their children in the most successful way, then that's something that we as speech language pathologists can do. But I want to really talk about with WWO here in the States, having the program in a public school in Brooklyn, in one of the most economically deprived areas in Brooklyn. We opened an EOP space, and the beauty of that was that even though the school district had so many mandated programs that the teacher needed to do, once we showed our programs, which were playful and interactive and colorful, and the teachers got so on board and so excited that they added it into their curriculum. And then we did parent trainings at night. We brought parents in through the PTA there at the same school, and we showed the way we were working with the children during the day. And this was pre-K and kindergarten, so many, many classes in the school. And it was just so exciting to see the faculty and the parents come together in this joyful way, and really understanding that playfulness and listening and language were at the foundational level of real learning. And it's interesting because that project that we had for 3 years, and we worked with that staff for 3 years, and I'm still in that's over with now. They are still using the program in all their pre-Ks and all their kindergarten classes because of the value added to expose the children to something a little bit different, of this language infused program with a whole lot of joy and a whole lot of playfulness, which I think is lacking very much in our world today.
Absolutely. And you bring up such a good point that everyone was happy to embrace this programming. Their children were happy. They approached this style of learning with such joy and enthusiasm, as did the parents and the teachers. So thank you, because lucky teachers, lucky parents, lucky students. That was an amazing program. I'd love for you to, if you can remember, because it was a 3-year program, you could really see changes in behavior. What did the teachers and the parents relay to you as far as the changes in their children's behavior once the element of play was implemented and used within that, year's worth of curriculum, or 3 years worth of curriculum, because you were lucky enough to have a 3-year program there?
Right. I think that it was interesting because we went in initially with our EOP toys and our toy program. And that was in a separate space. They gave us a room and we trained that and people used it. And then we taught our early learning listening and language, which is called, early learning programs for pre-K and kindergarten, that were movements for sounds, to teach sounds, and it was phonological awareness, with also learning about books and stories and putting those together. And this is a program we have at WWO that I wrote, and we trained that, and they said the children leaving their pre-K and their kindergartners had their phonological skills at the 90% level, which they had never seen before. They were usually at the 50% level. So they did their own little study. But what was interesting about the play space, which wasn't used as actively because it was hard getting the children there, and they started using it for children that came into class upset and angry and disorganized, and were disrupting the class or needing a whole lot of the teacher's attention. And so they would bring the child, there was a special person there that would bring the child to the space and play with them in the way that we prescriptive play. And they would then settle the child down. The child would be open and settled and bring them back to class. And it was something that they came up with as a way to solve a problem they were having in their school. We didn't talk about that as a use at that time. We do now, but we didn't talk about it then. And it was so creative, but so perfect. And so, there are just so many stories we have. But at that 3-year program, we saw the way they used the program differently. And then the Sounds Fund has remained as part of the phonological and the storybook piece, has stayed as part of their curriculum. So
I want to jump in for a second and sort of note on what you said. I love the story of having the utilization of that room to help children regulate. So if you have a child who's dysregulated, who's upset, who cannot attend at that time because either they're overreacting or underreacting or behaving in a way that lets the staff know that they're not in a place that they can actually learn very well. Right. And taking them to that other room where they can be with somebody one-on-one in a sensitive, communicative, regulating way that helps them get back to a place where they're receptive and available for learning. This is when we talk about going back on a normal developmental trajectory. That's what we do when you have a child who's very upset. You don't make them sit down and learn. You calm them down first, hopefully communicatively and with language and some distraction and play and moving their body. And then they calm down. They can go back to doing whatever it is that they need to be doing. And it becomes a tool that the children then, my assumption is that when they got used to using that room, most of the children probably started calming down just getting into that room because it was associated with better regulation. And that becomes an internalized ability to regulate because you know that you can do it and you know how to get back to a place where you're available for learning. And this is such a important part of communication, of a dyad communication, that we understand the child is overwhelmed and we help them regulate to a place where they can actually learn. That's the opposite of what happens in trauma when children are actively stressed and there is no place at that time to help them regulate and they stay in that place, unable to really make use of learning opportunities. And when the adults are also in that space and unable to provide learning opportunities, we have sort of a recipe for delay, where interventions like what Lois described are why they're so valuable, because they sort of allow children to get back, and caregivers to get back on a normal communication developmental trajectory, and to fill in these gaps.
It's so interesting. If you don't mind, Claudia, I just want to respond to that, because that is the beauty, I really believe, of the WWO programming, this EOP programming, because it assumes that that's the state the children and the adults are in. And the programming is there as that tool, but it's not pushed or imposed on them. It's offered. And there's a whole other way of creating a space that's safe, secure, beautiful, colorful, filled with things that are tempting and exciting, and then being able to model the behavior just through play, without having to tell people, listen, or this is the way we do it, or asking questions and demanding answers. We've turned that around to this open, inviting place that actually has a tremendous amount of structure, but nobody knows it. They don't feel the structure. They feel this ability to, relax and enjoy. And that to me is what's so special. When people ask, what's the secret sauce? To me, that's the secret sauce.
I would call that secret sauce that you're allowing people to be in a regulated place and to regulate each other, because we regulate off of each other. If you have a child who's upset and a teacher who's yelling, you have two dysregulated people in the same space. And if a child's not listening and you say, no, listen to me right now, I'm talking to you, cut it out, stop doing it, you're not having a situation of learning. You're having two overactivated people, and then you have children who are like completely shut off, and or a teacher who shuts off. But when you're providing an opportunity for the normal regulation that happens between an adult and a child, when you have a baby who's crying and you pick them up and you hold them and you rock them and you talk to them, and that in a way is also very structured. It's just that you're not saying to the person, you have to walk with her for 30 minutes to this side, 30 seconds to this side, turn around, 30 seconds to the other side. That would be really overbearing. But the sort of the modeling that we see from other people and that we internalize, that you pick up the child and you talk to them and you walk with them and you soothe them and you explain what's happening and what you're going to do, creates that structured situation where the babies even learn to expect what is going to happen. So they have a sense of structure. Right. And a sense of being in a listening space and in a learning receptive space, which is normal for children to be in. And you have the adult also getting the sense of having agency in this and not being helpless and being able to actually help the child. Because what is often difficult in high stress situation is you have two people out of control. The child is out of control and the adult feels helpless, because they don't know how to de-escalate it and how to respond to a child in a way that helps the situation instead of makes it worse. And when you give models for normative interactions, then they're rewarding for both. And it reinforces normal attachment behavior and regulation behavior that are always learned together with language and communication. There's no culture in the world where dyad interactions between an adult and a child do not involve language. They always involve language, and song and play and playfulness and taking turns and all those things that are quite structured but not oppressive in that sense. So
thank you. Both of those responses were so hopeful. Like, what I get a sense of is a feeling that we have lost our sense of structure, and in some ways lost our sense of hope as a parent group, perhaps as children. I have 4 children, 2 little ones, and there is this lack of knowing what's going to happen kind of tomorrow. And this has brought us very close to the families that we work with internationally. And I just wanted you, I know you do extensive work in Israel, Naama. I know, Lois, that you've worked in so many different countries, not just the 5 countries that I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. Our countries, Haiti, Ethiopia, Bulgaria, Vietnam, and the US, but you've worked in so many more countries. I'd like to get your take on what seems to be, or what you're seeing in the children that you're working with in the States during the pandemic. I know, Lois, you've never been busier. And so many of your friends, speech language pathologists, feel exactly the same way. They've never been busier. Can you talk to me a little bit about any changes you've seen? And then I really want to talk about the hope behind all of the things that we are doing with our children, what you are doing with the children and the parents that you work with, both of you, because I do believe there's a huge well of hope, and the change can be so almost magical when you apply the play and the love and the joy in the process of learning. So please, whoever wants to start first and talk about any changes that you may have seen during the last 7 months, I would love to hear your feedback on that.
Well, I think that Nam and I both are working remotely. It hasn't been as big a change for me because I do work remotely in India and Dubai, and I have clients in Puerto Rico. So I've been working remotely for a very long time. But now the children, the students that I work with one-on-one in person usually, I'm now on a screen, and that is a huge change. The interesting thing about it is, because I did know these children before, one-on-one, we were able to at that point touch and smile and, be close to each other and interactive with each other, not just seeing each other and hearing each other. They are so happy and relieved when they see me on the screen, because they have one-on-one time with somebody that's not wearing a mask, right, and not hidden and not anxious. I'm not, I'm sitting here in my house feeling very relaxed and very prepared. And although we're not holding the same book, we're looking at the same things on the screen. And so we have that attachment and that joint focus, which is what play gives us, is joint focus, the two people in the dyad looking at the same thing at the same time. And that's very important. So I've seen kids that are craving that one-on-one experience. And so they've been delightful to work with. I think that for parents of the young children, they're very happy that I'm there to support them, or to take over and let them take a breath. But I think that we've learned a lot from this. I think parents have learned a lot from this, and that when we get back to normal, the whole wearing of masks for us in person with kids, they can't see our mouths, they can't, really hear us in the same way. So there's so many things to adjust to, and I think we'll figure it out as we go. But I feel that the pandemic, for me and the work that I do, I worked in Vietnam the other night. Sunday nights I train in Vietnam for WWO. I'm not there, but I am there, and I can bring people from all over the world together. So I think there's a lot of positives. And as far as hope, I have a tremendous amount of hope. I do think that children will need more play. We're going to be so traumatized by having to sit and do work and a screen. I think this need for a release is going to be very needed, and for parents to really learn how to work with their children. I could go on and on, but I feel a lot of hope about, I think we've lost some things, but we've also learned a lot, is the way I'll say it. I don't know, not if your experience is the same as mine.
I think it's in general, I think, Lois, neither you or I would be in this business if we didn't have a lot of hope. And people say, oh, you're a speech pathologist, must be just hard work. And I was like, it is hard work, but it's lovely, because I don't think there's any better work to do. I mean, you basically see children grow and develop and families, and you learn from the children all the time, and you learn from different families. I think that, like any, maybe because we're looking at this, Lois, from a speech pathologist point of view, as a there's communication, and you find other ways to communicate. If you're unable to communicate one way, you find another way. I always say that all behavior is communication. If a child is misbehaving, they're communicating something. When a child is kind of leaning against us and being all nice and cuddly, there's something they're communicating. And there are other ways that we're learning to communicate now that are just in a bit of a different modality. So if you have a child who is sitting at the screen and blocking their screen or muting themselves or doing other things, that's also behavior that's telling us something about what is happening in the moment between us. I agree that this is not normal. We're meant as human beings, we're programmed to interact in 3D. And the children that I work with are children, the vast majority of them are children I've worked with already before. We have rapport, we have a real sense of each other. We've have rules that were established about unwritten rules about how we work and how we go about things and what the expectations are. And it's sort of, after some adjustment, it's a sort of we moved into that, and the children learn how to work and the parents learn how to work. I think it's a little different when you have to form relationships that way.
Exactly.
I think it's very difficult when we get to saying assessments that way. No assessments are normed and standardized on this kind of providing tests. There's a sort of additional kind of stuff. And I think that part of what's been helpful for me, and I think for the parents, is to say, we're all learning. This is new to all of us. So let's, figure out what works. And when you figure out what works and you work on it together, there's a sense that connects to sense of hope. You have a sense of agency. You realize, we made it work. It's really working better now that we changed the room, or we changed where the child is sitting, or we changed what screen the child has. And that's also communication. So it's basically utilizing these times where maybe it seems like a lot of out of control and a lot of things you don't have a lot of leeway with. You do have a little leeway with some things. And when you figure out how you work within those, children learn to problem solve because they see the adults around them working to problem solve. And they learn to verbalize what they need. And we tell them what we need. We need to sit up. Can you maybe turn the screen because I can't see from the light from the window. So all that narrative and stuff is interactions that continue in a different setting. Uncomfortable, but there is no lack of hope. Also because children are resilient, and when they have adults in their lives who adapt and are there to help support them and help them understand what are we doing, why are we doing it differently, what are the fun things that we can do. I have all kinds of toys that sort of come visit in the middle of a session. They sort of, peek in and they come to say hello and they leave, and they sort of, so it's kind of fun in just in a different way. And the children are learning modes of communication that we never had. Some of them are super comfortable with screens now. And I just want to add a point about a lot of parents are anxious about doing things on a screen because they say, oh, he hates school on a screen. He hates that. I can't even get him to sit. And Lois mentioned something that is so important. We do this one-on-one. And the one-on-one situation is very, very different than what happens in the class when you have a lot of children and a teacher who's either in the same space or God knows what space. And it's not the same. It's not the same. So even those who feel, oh, I can't do these things on Zoom because my child hates Zoom, they might not hate virtual stuff. They might just prefer a one-on-one kind of thing, or they need to learn how to increase the time that they're able to stay attending with the screen. So it's all learning, and it's all part of what we do. So
and I love the fact that you both mention that it's about overcoming challenges, and what better way to do that than through play, through very deliberate communication and love between the parent and the child. It's really the best possible method for bringing joy to the situation of deliberate learning. It's learning through play. So it's not supposed to be something else. It's a beautiful way to learn. So I love how you both describe that. I want to just put on my glasses for a second and read something that you mentioned in your bio, which I thought was so perfectly aligned with how WWO works. And I just want to say this: to optimize your basic mission is to optimize children's lives and to improve understanding of the complex links between language, overwhelm, resiliency, trauma, and development. And when I think about WWO, it's very much about helping children realize their potential. And these two phrases, realizing the potential and to optimize a child's life, it seems so beautifully aligned. So I love what you do. I love how you do it. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing this beautiful philosophy of how you work with the children. Lois, you are part of our family. It's so lovely to see you with your peer friend and colleague talking about your profession. It just makes me so happy to be doing what we are all doing, what I am lucky enough to be doing for the last year at WWO. And thank you both so much for sharing your wisdom, your experience. It has been a pleasure talking with you. And I kind of want to get off so I can call you and continue the conversation. But thank you both. You've filled me with hope and a lot of experience and good stories about overcoming the challenges and being resilient and bringing joy to learning. And thank you both so much for joining us. And thank our audience. Thank you for participating as audience members. And please join us next month for our next webinar. Hope to see you soon. Thank you. Thank you all.